Stiamo aspettando l'ultimo ospite, anzi relatore, relatrice, e poi siamo pronti. Ci siamo.
Okay, welcome back. So today we are here for an event which is promoted by IED, the European Institute of Democrats. And we also have Repubblica Futura, who is playing host to this conference here in San Marino. We are going to talk about a very important topic, which is a core topic for the future of all of us and for the future of our planet. We are going to talk about biodiversity, the natural response to a necessary change. We have topics which are very topical in the international and national debate. We have the United Nations agenda for the guidelines and what is to be done also for experts, very, very important experts I'm going to talk about and I'm going to introduce to all of you. But we will also try to take advantage of all the inputs coming from the European countries and also experts at the European level. So I'm going to introduce the main speakers of today's event, and then I'm going to leave the floor to Francesco Rutelli, who is the president of IED. Well, we will have Marco Gualtieri, which is to my left. Then we also have an economic professor. He also founded the Seed and Chips. He is a very important CV also for the organization of this kind of connection between economy and environmental topics. And then I have 2 pages of curriculum. Well, my congratulations. Then we also have Fritz Höfler, Mr. Höfler, remotely from the Nuremberg University. He has a very particular history because he was a businessman and then he came back to the countryside, and he is also specialized on bees that are very important for biodiversity. Piero Manzoni is also remotely connected. He is the founder of a Neuro-Rural Hub. He is also a very important person who is going to talk about how technology can help us for achieving the United Nations objectives. And then we also have Florence Usbrook-Zvezona. I'm so sorry for the pronunciation. She is the president and the founder on the Balkan Sustainable Development Institute, BSDI, and she will talk about very concrete experiences and the SDGs of the United Nations. Well, since time is running out, I'm going to leave the floor to Mr. Rutelli for the welcome greeting, so the president of IED. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. This is our friendship for the Friends of Repubblica Futura. I'm the president of the Institute of European Democrats. In the last few years, we shared a lot of different initiatives, and I think that my wish couldn't be warmer and very sincere. This event is getting back to the future. We wanted to rebuild and build better our community in the oldest republic of the world. And I also had the honor of getting a prize and being awarded, and I received this Republican Prize, which is one of the most precious and the most valuable ones when I was in the Italian government. So we have freedom as a value and responsibility as a value as well. Well, in the life of institutions, you will also bring this tradition of openness and also this willingness of rebirth, and also this relationship with Italy, with our people, that is very important for our integration, but we don't want to sacrifice our love for this very old and well-rooted tradition, which is also a very important tradition that cannot be destroyed and cancelled or maybe weakened. This is my message, the message of a historical friend of Repubblica Futura. I'm also a very old friend of yours, and this is a message for your community. We have done a lot of things together, and we will do much more in the future. Also, for my contribution, for growing together, for having a stronger and stronger identity for your community, and also for the reshuffling of your institutions, also at the political level, social level, and civil level as well. Thank you. Well, then we also have Mara Valentini, who plays host to this meeting. She is the newly elected coordinator of Repubblica Futura. So, first of all, good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'd like to thank the president of the Institute of European Democrats, Francesco Rutelli. This was a welcome greeting, and he introduced in the best possible way this conference, which is devoted to biodiversity and also to change, which is necessary when it comes to our approach to nature. My thanks also go to all the organizers of this conference, the organizers of the Institute of European Democrats, IED, but in partnership with Repubblica Futura and Mr. Mattia Ronchi. Above all, they have set up this important meeting for all of us. Biodiversity is an extraordinary variety of life on Earth. This is a kind of a natural balance and a great one. We also tap into this balance every single day. Life, food, air. This is kind of a synergy that has an impact on our bodies, but also on our mental health, but also on our economies. The well-being of nature is important, not just because it has an impact on our bodies and on our mental health, but also for its ability, for the ability of our society to tackle and deal and cope with climate change, natural disasters, as we often see in this period. Nature is essential and vital for our existence, for also the space it needs. We just owe this space to nature. And if we want to find a balance between mankind and nature, this must be stable. Repubblica Futura has just concluded the first series of panel discussions on the health of our planet in the future. The title was The Future Health. Health is changing and will keep on changing in the future. We had very important speakers, for example, researchers from our university, who also proved that our global health system, One Health system, also depends on social indicators that have a very strong impact on our health. For example, well-being, psychological and bio balance that comes from ideological processes, but also from social, cultural, political processes and environmental processes. This change is now necessary. Medicine will also have to change and be more focused on prevention rather than healing. And the COVID-19 pandemic also was a kind of a warning sign, and we had to open up our eyes. These warnings also deal with the increase of a very small powder in a lot of different areas. I'm not a scientist, but I talk about what media talk about. So these are particulates. I would like to leave the floor to our scientists and our great speakers that will also tell us something more about this new knowledge. Last but not least, I would also like to thank the Involo Cooperative, which prepared for all the guests these small pots that also contain this great, very smellful lavender, which is really appreciated by bees and very important for this kind of natural balance. But this is also important because I also make a lot of cakes and a lot of delicacies. So let's remember that the service sector, the third sector, the one of cooperatives, social cooperatives, all these is part of our natural balance. And it is important not to underestimate all this. It is important to support all this. They are a wealth. Mr. Maurizio Ceccoli, who is in charge of our social cooperative in Volo, has also started with a lot of courage this great reality. And he also employed many men and women with disabled people with mental handicaps, but also physical handicaps and mental handicaps. Well, work is a sign of dignity, and this was given to men and women. Well, we are just talking about men. Thank you, Maurizio.
Going more into detail of this discussion, I would like to make a short comment about what I thought about when they first told to me about biodiversity. Usually I think about documentaries, you know, the forest and the Amazon, wild animals, and it feels like something very far from us. But then I realized, reading the presentation that Marco Gualtieri is going to give us today, is that the depletion of animal and vegetal species in the world is directly linked to our everyday life and our well-being. We're not talking about some exotic species on the other side of the world. We're talking about what we eat every day. It is easier to cultivate one type of cultivar here than another type. So it's all connected, and it all has a huge impact on our life, on our health, and our economy. And it's precisely about economy and biodiversity that Marco Gualtieri is going to talk about. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all those who are here, all those who are following online. I would like to thank the organizers for having invited me, but most importantly for the vision that comes out of the title of this event. I will just go back to what the person that introduced me has just said, and what I want to do with you is to take stock of this situation, and start from this starting point. What is biodiversity? When we talk about biodiversity, what is the first thing that we think about? If you have a look at my title, I move into a different dimension, the economic one, biodiversity, the biggest economic sector in the world, which is something that takes us aback a bit, because when we think about biodiversity, we think about these wonderful animals. But it's not just that. They're one part of it, but there are thousands of extraordinary species, colorful, fascinating, inspiring species all over the world. We saw the birds, but we cannot forget the insects. We see butterflies, we see bees. Bees were already mentioned, and I think they will be with us again in the future. They will come back. And then when we think about insects, we move directly to plants and flowers with these incredible colors, with their incredible smell that looks a bit like art. It's very elegant, isn't it? And then we move again to the forest when we talk about plants, and we talk about forests, woods. We have here an entire wood, and when we talk about a wood, then we move to mushrooms. But mushrooms, the way we conceive them is, people going mushroom picking like Claudia Mularoni, my dear friend. But mushrooms are not just that. It's a whole world that we don't know very well, that we should start analyzing more, because we wouldn't be here without the mushrooms. They have an essential role for the life on the planet, just like any other element, living being in the world. And then from mushrooms, we go underneath, we go down into the ground, which is a whole new dimension that we don't know well, even less than the mushrooms, because, all the organisms, they just become smaller and smaller, and we know less and less about them. But then when we talk about depths, we cannot forget the depths of the sea, of the oceans. The waters cover 85% of our planet. The oceans, the seas, the lakes. The mother of all oceans we see here, the whale, is one of the species that is fundamental. It's a cornerstone, and we will see why. But the deeper we go, the less we know about oceans. There is a whole world to be discovered that. Then we have the corals, the microorganisms. So all of these elements, all of these living beings, the animals, the plants, the mushrooms, the bacteria, all of them, all together, they interact, they're all connected. And if we don't understand this, then we're going to miss an important piece of the puzzle of who we are and how we have to interact with with nature. But to just end this point, I would like to give you one set of data. We only know today 1.6 million species on the planet. Scientists think that there are 7, 8 million, some say 10 millions, and it's mind-boggling. We as human beings, with all our history and research and discovery, we just know probably 1/4 of the existing species. So there is so much to be discovered. And there is another element that I would like to underline, and that is that each and every one of them has a role, has a function. They're all connected. We don't think about it. We see an ant and we think it's just an ant. But no, it's teamwork. There's an interaction. There's a link. And the problem is that we severed all the links. We broke all the links. And if you broke one link, the entire chain suffers. So we have to look at each and every one of these living beings as a worker on this planet, someone who is working for us. This is the real change in perspective. that we need for a change in paradigm, to open up, to widen our horizons and holistic vision about nature. This is what we need. And we have so far a very limited perspective. And now we go back to one of the elements. I singled out here the bumblebee. You know, he's furry, airy, fatty, and we never think about it. We always mention bees, but this kind of bee, the bumblebee, is essential. In pollinating insects are responsible for 75% of the food we eat, which is incredible, but it's also incredibly worrying because everything we have been doing in the last years is causing the disappearance of impollinating insects. If they disappear, we're not going to eat again, because what they do, these incredible insects, what they do is create the food that we eat. These wonderful colors, these masterpieces of nature, of flavor, of color, of smells. This is what we have, and this is what we eat, and we wouldn't have it without impollinating insects. And here we talk about food and drink biodiversity. What is biodiversity in the agro-food sector? Just a couple of data that give us the bigger picture. We, as human beings, we know 30,000 edible plants on the world that were studied, analyzed, and discovered. If we think about what I said earlier, it's probably just one small part of what is on the planet. But we have 30,000 types of edible plants. But 7,000 are the plants that human beings have been using as food, as a source of food in the history of humanity. And this could be a positive news if we look at the glass half full, because there is still so much to discover. But if we go deeper, we see that in the last years, I'm talking about the last 50, 70 years, we have been cultivating only 150 types of plants. And this is an alarming set of data. We are destroying biodiversity. And then it gets worse, because only 30 types of plants cover most of our food needs, meaning they feed 7.5 billion people living on the planet. And only 3 make up for more than 50% of our daily intake of food. So rice, maize, for example, corn. So why is biodiversity essential for what we eat? Because this type of approach is destroying the biodiversity corridors, the links between the different elements of nature, and the effects of that are coming back to us, they're coming back biting us. But we always have to see the glass half full with a positive approach, don't we? So let's have a look at these numbers. USDA, which is the authority in charge for food and agriculture in the US, USDA has mapped recently 188 chemical components in food. So 188 components that are useful, that are used in the food we eat. So why is that important? Well, because 3 American universities started a project, the Food-O-Me project, mapping 28,000 chemical components. I'm not talking about bad chemical components. It's components that we find in nature, but it's like, if you like football, going to play a Champions League match with a third league team. Now, basil, which is typical Italian and Mediterranean plant, and it's the basic ingredient of pesto, one of the most loved sources for pasta in the world. It contains 2,193 chemical components with 329 effects, repercussions on health. What do these numbers tell? They tell us that there is a whole world to be discovered. We could go back to 2,000 years ago when Hippocrates said that food is medicine. And today, with the skills we have and the technologies we have, we can know more, and we can know what can we do and how can we do it best. I could talk about it for hours. I know that I shouldn't, so I'm trying to keep it short. There's so much to say about that. But what do we have today? What do we have in our hands? What is biodiversity, and what are we talking about? Marco Gualtieri, what are you talking about, you can ask me. Well, I would say that biodiversity is life, is the diversity in life. It's also health, our health, but it's also beauty. And it has so many meanings and representations when it comes to beauty. It's culture in all of its forms and shapes, but it's also pleasure, the pleasure of the senses, the taste, the smell, the touch, sight. In all of these, it's wealth. It's the real wealth we have. And I dare everyone, I don't know if people can interact, those who are online, but I dare you to find one word that represents all of these concepts together. So biodiversity does it. Let's talk about wealth, economic wealth. And we see that the numbers there could, should change our mind. All of the international research projects, this is one from the European Union, said that more than 40,000 billions, 40 trillion euros, depend on biodiversity. It means that 60% of the GDP in the world is based on the food sector, on nature. We're talking about food sector, pharmaceutical, textile, tourism, chemistry sector, building, ecosystemic services. So we're talking about the entire GDP of the planet, including both advanced and less advanced countries. What does that mean? It means, if you're talking money, that we are not doing the math as we should, because we should factor in all the consequences of the loss of biodiversity that are caused by climate change. It's a vicious circle. But the problem of biodiversity is even greater. It's even bigger. It's even more alarming. We know the effects of climate change. We see them every day. The floods, the increase in illnesses and pandemics, drought, desertification, which means abandoning areas, the loss of life, entire areas that become, ghost cities. The United Nations tell us that due to the loss in biodiversity, 80% of the SDGs, which are our guiding principle, I have them in my heart, it's my guiding principle every day. Well, we're going to look, 80% of those SDGs will not be attainable because of the loss of biodiversity, which is something that the following speakers will talk about more detail. But there's good news. And the good news is that the value of ecosystemic services is up to 105 or 15 trillion euros per year. Meaning what biodiversity can produce in economic terms it's incredible. It's such a huge amount of money that we can't even calculate it, and it's 1.5 the GDP of the world. And you could ask me, what are you telling? I mean, these numbers are incredible. Yes, they are, but they're true. This is what science has found, and this means that we're not giving nature the value it deserves, the importance it deserves. And there is a whole series of factors, events, and costs that are not calculated in there. For example, let's go back to our friend the bumblebee. This is the value of impollinating insects, 153 billion euros, 22 in Europe, 3 in Italy. And then we go back to our dear old friend the whale. Why did I say that it is the cornerstone of the natural and sea system? There are some species that are called cornerstone species because they are in small numbers if we compare it to the kind of positive effects they can create. It's kind of a domino effect. So if you eliminate one, the entire system is at risk. I would like one day, if we organize, a 2.0 version of this event, to tell you all the different associations and comparisons we can do with the whale, with a glass of wine. Why? Because the whale loves phytoplankton. They eat a lot of phytoplankton, and all of the oxygen we breathe, 50% of it comes from phytoplankton. The phytoplankton is responsible for the activation of the cycle of water. So if whales disappear, it's not just a problem like, oh no, they're disappearing. It's alarming because without them, there is no phytoplankton and we can't breathe. Just a couple of comments in a few minutes I have left. In 2050, 70% of the population will be living in cities. And this means that in 100 years, from 1950 to 2050, the proportion is completely reversed. You had 30% cities, 70% in the countryside before, and now it's the opposite. So the role, the importance of parks and gardens on biodiversity is going to be essential in cities. And we also have to say that we are 3 times more on these. There are 3 times more human beings on this planet than in 1950. So the green urban areas. When we talk about green areas, we cannot forget the corridors, the peri-urban and urban parks and green areas. We have to preserve them. Otherwise, our friend the bumblebee and all of his friends and sisters and brothers will not be able to survive, just like any migrating bird. I know that Piero Manzoni is with us today, and he will be presenting a very concrete, a case study of what they have done not far from the city center of Milan and how they managed to obtain very positive effects on the entire city of Milan. There are a series of reports and research studies that clearly scientifically show the impact of biodiversity and nature on our lives. I just listed some of them: reduction of heart diseases, asthma, more fertility, and this is, if you think about it, incredible, more kids. A lot of those very positive effects: reduction of violence, criminality, mitigation of temperatures, and also reduction of inequalities. I want to show you something, but what I wanted to say before that is this is a turning point, and it will be on us as politicians and scientists, as individuals, to protect our biodiversity as something that is not exotic, that is part of everyday life. It's not something that is nice to have, it's a must have. And now just to end my presentation for moms and parents, I think this is a very nice way to tell the importance of biodiversity is this. This is the representation, graphical representation of the brain of a 9-year-old boy. It's an MRI. You know, the difference is, there's no difference. It's the same kid, but the kid on the left was before a walk in the park, and the other one is after a 20-minute walk in the park. The red and yellow areas are the ones that activate the stimuli in the brain. So if you talk to a parent and you tell the parent that the kid can be healthier and smarter by going for a walk in a park, I think their parents are going to be the first revolutionaries to protect biodiversity. So this is kind of a summary of what I said. If someone in the audience or online managed to find a word that represents all of these concepts, well, you won, guys. From an economic point of view, we are talking about all of the regeneration activities, both urban and agriculture. We're talking about everything that has to do with circular economy and all of those nature-based solutions, like the one that Piero Manzoni is going to present soon. We're talking about, I don't know, ecosystemic services. Sorry, I couldn't read what I wrote. What we call biomimetics. Biomimetics means being inspired by nature to offer products, services, and systems. Leonardo da Vinci is one example. He got his inspiration watching birds fly. Being inspired by the wonderful world of nature. It's also the agri-food tech business, so the entire world of life sciences. This is the biodiversity economy that, according to the World Economic Forum, can create in the next 10 years 9 trillion euros of wealth and 394 million jobs. Now, politicians around the world, if you're trying to find a solution, the solution is just before your eyes, just outside of the window. You have the chance to create a different world, an inclusive world, a sustainable world, a better world for the future generations. Things are changing fast, and we need to change fast and change and be different. And we can do that only together. Thank you.
Well, if we take a look at some of these numbers, well, we really feel dizzy, so to say, but it's not something we really consider, all these human activities and mankind activities. Then we will have some time for questions, maybe. But anyway, I would like to explore a couple of issues. I don't want to take the time of the next guest. We have Fritz Höfler, who is connected remotely. And he's a professor, university lecturer. He taught business, and then he rediscovered his love for nature, in particular for bees. Well, he will be talking about how to improve biodiversity within the existing agriculture and farming frameworks. So we will move on to agriculture-related aspects as far as biodiversity is concerned.
Hello. Yeah, hello, here's
Eccolo.
Fritz Höfler. Do you
Eccoci.
understand me?
Adesso ci sentiamo, sì?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, very good, very good. And you can see my presentation?
No.
No, actually not.
Yeah, you can see it? Okay, very good. Okay, buonasera a tutti. At first, I want to say thank you very much to get the chance to present our biodiversity project at this prominent stage. I will start with a really brief introduction of myself. After successfully completing my studies in business administration at university, yeah, I began my career as my professional career for several different employees, and then due to different reasons, I quit the normal career, the so-called normal career, and I got the qualification as a farmer, as a state certified agriculturalist, and managed my parents' farm in the north of Nuremberg in Germany. In the course of this, I got to know and love beekeeping. This hobby, founding an apiary, qualifying as a bee expert, then actually became my profession, and responsible as a project manager at the Agricultural Institute here in Triesdorf. I developed the so-called Varroa app, which has since become a permanent fixture in the Bavarian Varroa control concept. Subsequently, I worked as a certified pollination beekeeper for a startup company in Hamburg in the field of pollination management. As you can see, the bees are my business. The passion to share my passion finally led to the qualification as an educator in beekeeping at Mellifera. It's a non-profit organization here in southern Germany, which focuses on ecological and welfare-oriented beekeeping and the protection of the bees. And now, currently, at the moment, I'm working again for the Agricultural Institution in Triesdorf in the area of plant cultivation on the so-called Agro-Biodiversity project. So I will show you in the next few minutes some of our practical applications of scientific considerations. But first of all, I want to show you where I am at the moment. Triesdorf is located in Bavaria, in Germany, in the northern part of Bavaria. It's a really small village with around 170 inhabitants, but 3,500 students in various fields of agricultural education. Nevertheless, it's the smallest university location in Germany. Okay, the implementation of the Agro-Biodiversity project is funded by the Bavarian State Ministry of Food and Agriculture from October last year to spring 2024. So we have enough time to make many different measures in on our around 200 hectares around in and around Triesdorf. Yeah, various measures for agrobiodiversity are currently being researched and tested here in Triesdorf, mainly in close cooperation between the crop production and the beekeeping department. So I am kind of in between these two departments. The aim of this project is to show possible solutions for the federal government's farming strategy by making the agricultural landscape more permeable to biodiversity through measures and different cooperations. This means that biodiverse structures should be established across entire throws and habits. In existing to the fringing structures, flowering areas or strip of water, other areas are to be upgraded to so-called biotope stepping stones. The influences of management measures are tested and evaluated on the conventional and ecological areas here in Triesdorf. The Beetle Bank, as one of the first measures within the framework here of the Agrobiodiversity project, Beetle Banks were created. Beetle Banks, as you can see, are plowed earth walls 6 meters wide and 0.4 meters high. They are laid out as strips of field margins or in the middle of fields in order to connect existing structures like hedges, field borders, etc. And at the same time, they create living space and retreat. Preferred residents, of course, are insects or game. Due to the structure of the ramparts, with one side facing away from the wind and other facing the wind, a particularly favorable microclimate can develop, which promotes the increased settlements of insects. And this increases the food supply for insectivorous bird species like goldhammer, skylarks, lapwings, and so on. And those are rely them to raise their offspring. The structure of the beetle banks are designed in 3 stages. The typical flowering structures are shown below. Then we have grass accentuated seed mixtures, which are added to the slopes of the hills, and the crest of the dam remains open to prevent ground brooding insects, for example, giving wild bees the opportunity to nest. And a study of the British Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust produced a really astonishing result. Beetle banks offer habitats for up to 1,000 insects and spiders per square meter, compared to the structurally poor environment. Okay. The digital beehive. It was a project from a student work here at our university. As you can see, many techniques, many information systems. We use there's a use of a light barrier system which records every single entry and exit of every honeybee. Then we have breeding chamber sensors. We have humidity sensors, balance sensors. So we create a really large amount of data that should provide information about whether the measures in the flight circles of our honeybees, of our data collectors, show effects. The analysis of pollen. Also we have here in and around Tristov a total of 4 beetle banks set up. In the direct vicinity of these beetle banks, data has been collected in a very targeted manner since the beginning of the vegetation phase this year, 2021. On the one hand, with the help of the honeybee colonies. As you can see, the daily weight gain is recorded using so-called forage scales. The pollen is then intercepted, weighted, and analyzed, as you can see here in the picture. So there are different time frames where I put these forage scales in front of the honeybee hives, and the bees try to get in, but the pollen falls down into this scale, and then we can measure it and analyze it. And the first results in the area of bee pollen already show that the food situation in and around here Tristov is significantly better than a corresponding comparison location. I will show you a graph later on. This can possibly be attributed to the already existing structural elements and their networking through the beetle banks, of course. Then we have insect soil and air traps. We are working together with a university here in Tristov, especially with the Department of Zoology and Ecology. And they are working intensively with a team on the subject of soil traps and air collectors in order to make the effects of biodiverse enhancements on the beetle population regarding species and quantity, and of course the flying insects tangible. Air collectors, as you can see in the front, they usually these air collectors, as we name them, they usually consist of plexiglass panes arranged in a kind of cross shape, which are fixed at right angles to each other, so that 8 catch surfaces are created. And the flying insects hit the plane fall down and are caught in a funnel-shaped collecting device with a collecting vessel on the floor, and they were of course killed there. But yeah, the guys from the university analyzed these insects. Then we have also in use so-called insect cameras. Here you can see an insect camera in the foreground, which is recording the occurrence of flying insects. The insects are attracted by a colored glue trap. They stick to it, and the camera records the occurrence at defined times. The scientific evaluations then are then carried out together with the university after the vegetation phase in November or December this year. Monitoring impact of mason bees. Yeah, there are studies of the interactions between honeybees and wild bees, which also plays a role in the project and should lead to appropriate recommendations for action. It is important to find out whether and to what extent the mason bees have an influence on the honeybee population. Initial findings show no negative effects. On the contrary, mason bees increase the health of the fruits and the number of seeds in the apples, subsequently the fruitability. And despite a really high density of honeybees on the same plot, around 200 honeybee colonies are in the area of the mason bees, but that's yeah, it was very surprising for us, very positive. So coming to an end, we on the premises of the institution here in Triesdorf, there are insect cameras, we have forest scales, digital beehives, etc., which can record the possible influences on land management, on biodiversity. At the same time, numerous companies and organizations involved in the project worked as closely as possible together to share the know-how and to work together. Companies like our university or Pollinature. It's a company at the Lake Constance in the south of Germany. They handle the targeted pollination with mason bees here in the orchards of Triesdorf. Then we have a seed manufacturer, Feldensaden Freudenberger. They support us with a special seed mix tailored to the special requirements of a Beetle Bank. We have the animal health service, which analyzes the pollen. And of course, we have a really narrow cooperation with the with the Institute for Apiculture and Beekeeping in Veitshöchheim. With these guys, we'll finalize the scientific analysis and evaluation of the collected data. As promised, first result of the pollen collection. Now it's here, it's in German, but nevertheless, I explain you the graph. We have here pollen sample collections during the canola and the lupine blossom. Yeah, the green columns show the amount of pollen collected in Triesdorf, here in Triesdorf, and the orange is the comparison location far away from Triesdorf. The graph demonstrates the relation between the sample weights in gram and the period of their collection, respectively, at two alternative sites, Triesdorf and Hesselberg. And the first results in the area of this bee pollen already show that the food situation in and around Triesdorf is significantly better than the comparison location. This can possibly be attributed to the already existing structural elements and their networking through the beetle banks. The amount of pollen collected at the beetle bank locations here in Triesdorf is 2 to 3 times as high as the comparison location without beetle banks. And this is just the first initial result. So here you can see some logos of that represent the next possible cooperation partners. It's the Bavarian State Institute for Agriculture, the LBV. It's all around birds in Bavaria. So at the end, we want to create a kind of in the words for beekeeper, a kind of swarm intelligence of the partners and the stakeholders. Yeah, and this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your interest and your attention. Questions?
Grazie, grazie.
Thank you very much also for this very insightful overview, and you also showed that in this topic it is possible to have some important data that we can analyze, and we can also compare all of them, and we can also submit them to political institutions and institutions in general. So this is a very important aspect of your work. Thank you. So I would suggest we can move on. I'd like to thank once again Mr. Fritz Höfler. We would like to move on to Piero Manzoni. Piero Manzoni is also connected remotely, and he will be talking about this project, which is Neorurale Hub. Well, it's about investing in biodiversity, agrofood tech, and circular economy. So the Neorurale Hub project. So something I was impressed by is this passage. Well, from farm to fork and back to the farm, back to the field. This is the goal of this project that Piero Manzoni is going to talk about in a very detailed way. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really sorry not to be there with you. I'm sorry I couldn't make it there, but it will be there will be other occasions. I will go straight to the point, and when we talk about future needs, we talk about resources, natural resources, their use, and the optimal use of these. And we're talking about all natural resources. We cannot prioritize some over others if we want to protect them. Natural resources are the resources we know, every one of us knows: water, air, energy, soil, and biodiversity. Resources are being extracted by the world and nature we live in, which is the only one we have. That is why we should reinsert resources in the circle of resources. If we want to keep asking the planet, we also have to start giving. But it is also hard to even conceive that, because with an increasing world population, we have to be well aware that this is not something to be solved easily or overnight. In 2050, we will have on this planet 10 billion people. Today, in 2021, we're 7.5 billions. This population lives today for 45% in cities, and that amount will be 70% in cities. This huge movement of people from rural areas to cities will create further problems, other problems. cities are sexy, if you want. They are nice with pubs and bars and schools and services. A lot of chances to connect with people, theaters. Yes, but on the other side, you have a lot of problems in city because 8 billion people will be living in cities in 2050. Do you know the average surface of the planet covered by big cities? It is 3.5%. 8 billion people live in 3.5% of the planet's surface. And that is going to create, ladies and gentlemen, huge problems. And there's one point to be taken into account, that cities need food. Food cannot be made or manufactured in cities. Of course, yes, we can have city gardens, yes, small tomatoes, yes, but we cannot conceive to, feed 8 billion people by making food in cities. And also, we cannot even consider that cities will solve the problem of what they don't need anymore, rubbish. Because with such a high density of population in cities, cities alone will not be able to solve the issue of rubbish, of what they don't need within the city. And the same is true for energy sources. Such a huge need of energy cannot be met by the city's local production of energy. And also, the pollution you have. The amount of pollutants in areas that are so populated is going to go up, not down. So we cannot think that those very sexy cities and towns will be living and operating without the use of, without a connection with the rural areas and to cooperate with them. So let's start with the food. Our challenge today is a very complex one. If you see in 2050, we talked about population, but we will need to meet the needs of food of that population. More than 60%, we will have to increase 60% of food production. Just consider that today 33% of soils is already made to highly degraded due to loss of fertility. Why? Well, because if we keep using fertilizers, chemical mineral fertilizers, if we don't prioritize the organic matter in soils, we cannot create the food because that organic matter structures the soil. If the soil doesn't have structure, it will not have the chance to produce food. If you think about it, it will not stay in the same place. If you think about the desert, you have dunes in one place today and in another place the day after. So 60% plus 60% of food, 33% of soils at risk of desertification. It's very complicated. And we thought, what is the solution for this problem? We started thinking about it when we were, landing in Malpensa airport, which is a huge airport in northern Italy, 50 kilometers from Milan. What you see here is what you actually see when you land over Malpensa. If you look over, the guardrail of the motorway, it's an endless area on the x and on the epsilon side, if we want to talk mathematically, with no vertical dimension. It's completely flat. There is no water, there is no woods, nothing. There's nothing, there's no life, there's no water, there's nothing. Why? Well, you should also consider that what we call the agricultural desert, it's actually a park in northern Italy. It's the agricultural park of the southern area of Milan. How can it be a park? You can ask. How can it be a protected area if there's nothing? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's so flat. But why do we have this flat landscape? It was a political decision. This is how you get here. In agriculture, it works like this. Producers receive incentives from the Common Agricultural Policy, the European Common Agricultural Policy, but we have the same thing in the US. So they get incentives and they use it for the part that they produce something that has a higher cost of production, a cost that is higher than what he can get by selling that product. This is because ever since the world was globalized, food like maize, corn, rice became commodities. But a nectar of rice, for example, in the north of Italy, will produce 1 unit yearly, in Madagascar 3, in India 2, let's say. This means that a nectar of area cultivated as rice in Italy is worth 1/3 than in Madagascar. So this common agricultural policy only supports the farmers. Does it make sense? Does it make sense that we pay money, taxpayers' money, to create? And the Common Agricultural Policy is the biggest item in the budget of the European Union to protect the farmers. And the farmers, because of these incentives, and since incentives are given on the number of planted hectares, when they see a plant, they see a tree in the middle of the field, they cut it because they lose centimeters. And this is true for bushes, any type of natural element that is sacrificed in the name of incentives. But there is a solution, and this is what we try to do. There is a solution, and I can tell you that by the example we used, there is a solution, and that is basically what nature does if it is left alone, if it is left free to act. This is a slide by FAO that shows how the natural cycle of food through the chlorophyll and photosynthesis makes it so that phosphorus and all the nutritional elements, potassium, they are absorbed by the plant, led to the fruit, eaten by animals living on the planet, and then reinserted into the soil through the food cycle. If the soil is left to itself, is not labored, it will protect erosion, the soil from erosion, but it also will make the soil richer. and it also helps to stock CO2 in the ground, in the soil. By following these concepts with the use of 3 universities, Pavia, Milan, and Wageningen, we started a reconstruction of the plain of 500 hectares. If you see where I'm pointing, where it says 1996, you see an agricultural desert, the same that we were saying before. On the left, on the top left side of the slide, if you look at the same building, which is a farmhouse, you see it in the environment as it looks in 2014. It is the same building, but the landscape has changed completely. This is a slide that shows how biodiversity improved within those 500 hectares that were the object of our project. The growth is incredible. It's mind-boggling, even for us. I won't go into detail, but look at the last number. The fertility index. I will not tell you how we measure it, but the soil fertility is plus 153%. It's almost 3 times the fertility index in any plot of land next to the regenerated area. This number and this data makes it so that we are a company that went back to the year 1000 in 25 years. And that's incredible. It's huge, great news. This is very great news, I think, because it means that in 25 years, nature, without intervention of man, of human being, was able to go back to make up for what has been lost. Now I will show you a couple of pictures, because what I talk about exists. It was created, it was photographed, and I think photos are the proof. They were taken in the regenerated area of Neo-Rural, and you can see them here. We have 20,000 ducks, mallards, geese. We have all of the species of the European type of eagles, herons, peregrine falcons. 650. We have roebucks. We've seen the wolf lately. This is not a picture where you see the herons. And this is not a picture that shows how agriculture was regenerated. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, 16 kilometers from the very earth of Milan, Piazza Duomo, which is the main square. This experiment gave us lots of data, thousands of different sets of data that we applied to technologies that are used in agriculture, common standard agriculture, so that agriculture is not just an agricultural service in itself, but it is also an ecosystemic service that is useful for cities and towns and villages nearby. So the city is not surrounded anymore by an agricultural desert. It is surrounded by an incredibly beautiful area with an increased biodiversity, increased by 180%, increased soil fertility plus 153%. We have integrated economic activities into it because we created venture capital and a startup accelerator in the area, so that we are always in loop, updated on new technologies. And we have had exceptional results in the reduction of the use of fertilizers, water. We're not using fertilizers anymore, only the ones that we obtain by the remains and the trash of the city of Milan. And we recycle them and we reinsert them in agriculture without any chemical damaging components. We have a very high productivity, 30% for food production, cost reduced by 18%. We also had a plus 3% in net earnings. We have a production of renewable energy, in a beautiful, wonderful area where it is nice to live and where it is nice to innovate. This is not just the only area we've been working on. We have been doing this in other 2 continents. Near Toronto, in Canada, where we have 2,000 hectares. And same close to New Orleans. And 14,000 near Nairobi in Africa, where we have started the regeneration procedure of ecosystemic regeneration and technological innovation. I think that I spoke even longer than I should have. I apologize deeply to everyone. I thank you very much, and I leave the floor to the next speaker.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Piero, for also this idea of agricultural desert. I have never heard of it, but it's something which is quite insightful, and it makes us understand how hazardous and risky intensive farming can be also in specific areas such as the Pianura Padana in Italy, so the Padana plain. Then we have also Florence Winsbrook. Sorry for the pronunciation, and she's gonna explain concretely how within the European Union we can also act in order to bring together all these concepts we talked about. So you have the floor.
Eh bien, bonsoir. Alors moi, je vais commencer par la diversité, puisque depuis tout à l'heure, on entend diversité. De façon diverse, la première, c'est le français. Je vais vous parler en français. Et la deuxième, je suis une femme. La seule devant vous ce soir. Voilà. Donc, 2 diversités. 3 difficultés en même temps, parce que quand on est dernier à intervenir, vous savez très bien que ceux d'avant ont déjà tout dit, donc c'est difficile pour moi de rattraper et d'être aussi professionnel qu'eux, très difficile. Deuxième difficulté, c'est qu'ils ont dépassé le temps, donc moi il me reste très peu, donc je vais essayer d'être concise. Et la dernière difficulté, c'est que vous attendez impatiemment le dîner parce que l'heure est bien avancée, donc il faut que je puisse attirer votre attention. Alors je vais continuer. Vous avez vu en fait, la biodiversité, c'est pas simple, c'est intéressant, mais en même temps, c'est compliqué parce qu'il y a beaucoup de chiffres. Eh bien, la bonne surprise, c'est que moi je vais continuer à vous donner de chiffres, et vous savez pourquoi? Parce que la statistique dit qu'un être humain dans ce type de conférence, retient maximum 10% de ce qu'il va entendre. Donc, dans ces 10%, je vais essayer de renforcer pour que vous puissiez sérieusement sortir de cette conférence avec le plus d'informations et le plus de chiffres retenus. Alors, je continue avec les chiffres. Donc, qu'est-ce que disent les scientifiques? Moi, comme vous, madame, je ne suis pas scientifique. Je vais juste essayer de vous faire un petit schéma, un petit récapitulatif de tout ce que ceux qui travaillent, qui sont spécialistes dans ce domaine-là, peuvent faire. Donc, qu'est-ce que disent les chiffres? Les chiffres disent en fait, et ça je résume ce que mes prédécesseurs ont dit, les chiffres disent que d'ici 2100, notre population, la population sur cette planète-là va doubler, fois 2. Notre croissance économique, fois 4. Notre export commercial, fois 10. Et la biodiversité dans tout ça? Eh bien, je pense qu'en fait, ce soir, avant de quitter ce joli complexe tout neuf et très divers, peut-être la biodiversité, on la voit quand on tourne la tête, tournez, vous allez voir, la biodiversité, elle est dehors, elle a été bien prise en compte dans la construction de cet immeuble, de ce centre. Eh bien, vous allez sortir avec une seule, en tout cas principale information, c'est que tout ceci, c'est important. C'est important pourquoi? Parce que nous, on est des acteurs dans tout ce système-là. Et ce n'est pas simplement ceux qui prennent des décisions, c'est nous qui agissons. Et on est tous, je pense, d'accord et conscients que ce que nous sommes en train de faire aujourd'hui, c'est nos enfants qui vont subir et vivre les conséquences de nos actes d'aujourd'hui. C'est très important parce que ça permet de développer nos territoires. Vous l'avez vu avec tout ce que les autres intervenants ont expliqué. Mais c'est aussi important parce que ça permet de développer, au-delà de nous citoyens, nos enfants, les territoires, notre pays. Et au-delà du pays, toute la planète et tout le contexte international est lié avec tout ceci. Alors, je vais peut-être essayer de mettre mes slides. Voilà. C'était moi qui devais le faire, excusez-moi, j'ai oublié. Alors, j'avance un peu dans la question et j'ai envie en fait de résumer d'abord pour vous, je vous ai dit la répétition, c'est ce que je pense comme méthodologie est bonne pour mieux comprendre. D'abord, la biodiversité, c'est quoi? C'est la diversité biologique contractée. C'est pour ça qu'aujourd'hui, on utilise le mot biodiversité. Mais dans le temps, c'était la diversité biologique. La biodiversité, c'est quoi? C'est tout le vivant sur notre planète. Marco l'a bien expliqué, je le résume. Mais c'est aussi et surtout ces 3 piliers que Marco a bien introduits. Et moi, j'ai envie, en fait, de vous les raconter d'une autre manière. La première que je veux partager avec vous, figurez-vous que quand j'ai préparé cette conférence, j'ai appris que moi, Florence, être humain, je suis un écosystème sur pattes. Je marche, je suis un écosystème. Voilà. Pourquoi? Quand on réfléchit, on comprend bien. On est composé de bactéries, de micro-organismes. Et tout ça, ça vit ensemble, au fond, avec moi, avec la nature, avec tout ce qui nous entoure. Donc vous êtes aussi des écosystèmes. Si vous ne le saviez pas, ce soir, vous allez partir avec cette information. Alors, deuxième information que je voulais vous donner, c'est que je voulais partager avec vous, en fait, pour vous faire comprendre le deuxième pilier, un exemple concret avec une entreprise que j'ai rencontrée il y a 3-4 semaines. Nous étions en train d'échanger sur une entreprise avancée dans les questions de son impact environnemental, son impact sur la biodiversité. Nous étions en train d'échanger et le directeur de cette entreprise me dit « Mais Florence, tu sais, nous on est très... on regarde la biodiversité, on prend soin de toutes nos activités et on regarde tout ce qui se passe en fait autour de nous et ce qu'on produit. » Je lui réponds « Est-ce que vous avez mesuré l'impact sur la biodiversité de votre activité et de votre parking? Il s'agit d'une industrie. » Il me répond « Oui, on fait très attention. À chaque fois quand il y a un serpent sur notre parking, on s'arrête, on le prend et on le met dans la nature. On ne l'écrase pas. » Ça, c'est très bien. mais je ne suis pas sûre que c'est vraiment ça l'impact de nos activités sur la biodiversité. Ça, c'est la façon, une façon de prendre la biodiversité qui réduit et qui ne nous permet pas de voir d'une manière globale et d'avoir un impact différent pour nous et pour nos enfants et pour demain. Alors, je vais continuer. Je voulais vous montrer en fait un papillon. Alors, pour les traducteurs, c'est un papillon. Pour ceux qui comprennent le français, ça va être le phalène du bouleau. Et vous expliquer qu'est-ce qui s'est passé avec ce petit papillon. Ce petit papillon, comme vous l'avez vu en fait, il a une façon de vivre il vit avec les bouleaux, avec les arbres. Et donc, en fait, il y a ce mimétisme que vous voyez sur cette première photo. Donc, il se colle contre l'écorce et on ne le repère pas. Du coup, en fait, comme ça, il arrive à survivre. Or, en fait, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Il s'est passé que pendant les années industrielles, à côté de Londres, les bouleaux sont devenus tout noirs, de par la pollution. Et bien, ce petit papillon, il est devenu noir. Il a réussi, en fait, à avoir une mutation génétique pour pouvoir survivre à la mutation de la biodiversité des écosystèmes qui sont autour de lui. C'est comme ça, effectivement, qu'il a réussi à survivre, l'espèce a réussi à survivre jusqu'à nos jours, où effectivement les bouleaux sont redevenus blancs et le papillon est redevenu blanc. Voilà ce qu'est la biodiversité, voilà la diversité qui nous entoure, et comment elle peut s'adapter et comment elle peut avancer dans le futur. Alors, je vais continuer avec les chiffres. Alors, très rapidement, je cite ici le rapport de l'IPBES et d'autres recherches en fait, qui se font en parallèle. Je vois le sourire de Marco, parce qu'il sait très bien que sur la biodiversité, nous avons différents courants. On a des scientifiques en fait, qui cherchent, certains qui trouvent des choses, d'autres qui trouvent des choses qui sont un peu contraires ou pas tout à fait les mêmes. Voilà. Mais les chiffres officiels sur lesquels aujourd'hui on se positionne au niveau international, c'est surtout la perte de la biodiversité. Nous avons perdu 1 million d'espèces. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on connaît comme espèces aujourd'hui? On connaît entre 2 et 3 millions. Marco a cité 1,7 qui sont les chiffres d'un autre rapport. Moi, j'ai englobé et je suis allée un peu plus loin puisque je me base sur un courant similaire. Qu'est-ce que disent les scientifiques? Les scientifiques disent en fait que dans la nature existe entre 3 et 100 millions d'espèces. Donc, ça veut dire que nous ne connaissons que, admettons, 2 sur les 100 millions qui existent. Ça veut dire qu'à la vitesse à laquelle on est en train de perdre la biodiversité, nous perdons des espèces et de la biodiversité qu'on ne connaît pas encore et qu'on n'aura jamais la possibilité de connaître. Voilà, je continue avec les chiffres, puisque je ne veux pas vous perdre, hein, il me reste un peu de temps. Alors, combien pèse la biodiversité? Une question. Il y a des scientifiques, et moi j'étais très très étonnée de voir ça, mais il y a des scientifiques qui se sont amusés et qui se sont bien amusés parce qu'ils l'ont réellement calculé, et les chiffres sont vrais, à la base de ce qu'on connaît comme biodiversité, ils ont calculé combien ça pèse. Alors, il n'y a pas de mauvaise réponse, hein, encore une fois. Moi je vous pose la question. Est-ce la réponse 1, 100 000 tonnes? Ceux qui sont pour lèvent le doigt, hein. Il n'y a pas de jugement, hein. C'est juste un jeu pour vous réveiller, hein, parce que je vois certains qui s'endorment déjà. Est-ce que c'est A? Il y a des personnes qui sont pour A? Non. B, 5 mégatonnes? Non plus. C, 1 tératonne? Juste 3? Bon, au fond, non? Bon, peut-être c'est la réponse D, il n'y a pas de mesure. Pas de mesure? Pas de mesure? Ben si, ça pèse 1 tératonne. La biodiversité pèse 1 tératonne. Et vous savez combien c'est 1 tératonne? C'est 1 tonne avec 12 zéros derrière. Et alors, ils sont allés plus loin. Ils ont mesuré, est-ce que la biodiversité est plus lourde que ce que l'homme, l'être humain, a construit? Les bâtiments, l'industrie, tout ceci. Est-ce que ça, c'est plus lourd ou c'est la biodiversité qui est plus lourde? Mais aujourd'hui, nous sommes à l'égalité. Mais si on continue à produire de la façon dont on est en train de produire, très vite, on va dépasser le poids de la biodiversité. Alors, je vais revenir quand même au sujet que je dois traiter, hein, puisque au-delà des chiffres, il y a quand même le sujet de l'Europe et international. Et vous posez peut-être la question, mais pourquoi on parle de la biodiversité là maintenant, à l'instant? Pourquoi là? Pourquoi on n'a pas parlé il y a 6 mois, il y a 1 an? Pourquoi on n'a pas attendu? Pourquoi on ne parle pas dans 6 mois? Pourquoi là tout de suite? Eh ben, là, je vais me rattraper par rapport à ceux qui sont passés avant moi. Vous savez que depuis lundi jusqu'à demain, cours des négociations sur la COP 15, qui est la COP actuellement, ouais, qui est la COP, et d'ailleurs je félicite les organisateurs, je ne sais pas si c'est fait exprès ou pas, mais notre conférence se situe dans un élément international où tous les pays, où tous les décideurs se réunissent et préparent la vraie COP qui aura lieu en fait entre le 24 fin avril et 22 mai l'année prochaine. Alors, c'est peut-être pour ça qu'on parle beaucoup de la biodiversité actuellement, peut-être, c'est un des éléments. Mais c'est peut-être aussi parce que l'IPBES, qui est l'organe scientifique qui sort des rapports, vient de sortir son dernier rapport, dont je vous ai cité les chiffres sur la biodiversité. Alors, je tiens quand même, j'ouvre une parenthèse pour juste vous expliquer. L'IPBES, c'est une organisation scientifique qui regroupe 150 scientifiques représentant de 50 pays. Et pour sortir un rapport, ils travaillent ensemble déjà, de un, mais surtout, en fait, quand il y a des chiffres qui sont annoncés dans ce rapport-là, c'est que les 150 scientifiques sont d'accord avec ce qui va être annoncé dans le rapport. Alors, nous avons aussi un autre élément qui est important et qui se passe actuellement, qui est le rapport de GIEC. L'IPBES, en fait, c'est l'organisation scientifique sur la biodiversité. Vous avez parlé tout à l'heure également des problèmes de climat, aidez-moi, de la COP 26, de rapport sur le climat, sur le changement de climat. Donc le GIEC est l'équivalent en fait de l'IPBES. Donc on a deux organisations scientifiques qui travaillent. Alors la différence de l'IPBES, on a 150 scientifiques, dans le GIEC on a 250 scientifiques. Voilà. Donc ce sont quand même des organismes qui sortent des données qui sont importants et qui font que effectivement les choses bougent. Alors je vais prendre mes lunettes pour vous lire parce que concernant la biodiversité, nous avons pas seulement la COP 15 qui est en préparation. Pourquoi je vous ai parlé du climat? Parce qu'on a aussi la COP 26 qui arrive d'ici la fin de l'année et qui effectivement sortira avec des décisions à l'international et au niveau européen qui sont très très importantes. Alors, ce que je peux vous annoncer, puisque vous l'avez vu avec les personnes qui sont intervenues avant moi, je vais peut-être trop vite pour les traducteurs, donc je vais essayer de freiner. Ce qui se passe aujourd'hui, c'est que nous avons deux courants qui vont parallèlement, alors que, on l'a vu dans les présentations, que ce sont deux choses qui sont liées. Les problèmes du climat et les problèmes de la biodiversité vont ensemble. Elles ne peuvent pas être séparées. C'est pour ça que, au niveau international, on est de plus en plus en train de se poser la question à réunir les deux décisions, les deux mouvements, les deux positions scientifiques et pouvoir effectivement avoir une approche holistique, plus globale et qui permettra effectivement d'avancer d'une manière plus performante et plus cohérente. Alors, je tiens aussi à dire qu'il y a eu au niveau de la France au mois de septembre une conférence qui est sortie avec des résultats, avec des prises, avec des prises de décision qui aussi ont influencé le fait qu'aujourd'hui on parle de la biodiversité. Et le scoop que personne n'a cité jusqu'à aujourd'hui, c'est que depuis hier soir, dans le cadre de la préparation de la COP 15 sur la biodiversité, nous avons la déclaration de Kunming en Chine, qui a réuni 100 pays et qui a pris des mesures d'urgence fermes, acceptées par tous. Qu'est-ce que disent en fait ces mesures d'urgence sur la biodiversité? Elles disent qu'un fonds va être créé un fonds spécifique international va être créé. Et dans ce fonds, le président Xi Jinping a dit qu'il démarrera son activité avec 230 milliards de dollars. 17 milliards de dollars vont être accordés simplement pour le Japon. Alors, comment se positionnent en fait nos scientifiques au niveau international? Ils ont décidé que sur la biodiversité, ils vont travailler sur un projet qui s'appellera Vision 2050, vivre en harmonie avec la nature. Et dans tout ça, qu'est-ce qui se passe au niveau européen? C'est très bien au niveau international. Mais qu'est-ce qui se passe chez nous, en Europe? Eh bien, nous, en Europe, on a quelque chose que vous connaissez très bien, hein, qui est le Green Deal. On a plein d'autres stratégies, on a plein d'autres décrets, on a plein d'autres... D'ailleurs, le journaliste, je ne sais pas s'il est là tout à l'heure, il m'a dit, mais m'a posé une question, mais quelle est la cohérence dans tout ça? Parce qu'on a tellement de choses qui arrivent sur lesquelles on a déjà travaillé. Moi, je voulais vous présenter en fait d'abord quelques chiffres au niveau de l'Europe qui rejoignent un petit peu ce que Marco a dit. L'Europe a déjà travaillé bien avant la réunion à la préparation de la COP15, bien avant la convention qui vient d'être signée, etc., a déjà travaillé sur une stratégie qui s'appelle la stratégie biodiversité 2030. Cette stratégie, en fait, c'est un programme ambitieux. Honnêtement, je vous conseille de le lire. Il est très, très, très bien écrit. Prenez le temps, regardez-le. Vous comprendrez la complexité, mais vous comprendrez aussi la simplicité que ceux qui l'ont fait ont essayé de mettre dedans pour que nous tous, nous soyons acteurs et qu'on puisse effectivement enfin avoir un outil, une approche qui nous permette réellement d'avancer sur tous les sujets qu'on a vus depuis le début. Alors, pour faire ce document-là, qu'est-ce que l'Europe a fait? L'Europe s'est basée sur des chiffres. Et pas seulement les chiffres de l'IPBES, du GIEC ou des autres rapports, mais également d'un rapport interne qui est mené en Europe, qui s'appelle en fait l'état de la nature en 2020. Qu'est-ce que dit ce rapport? Ce rapport dit que 81% des habitats naturels en Europe sont perdus, n'existent plus. Il dit que 63% des espèces protégées n'existent plus. Il dit aussi, comme Marco et les autres l'ont dit, que 50% de PIB de nos pays arrivent en fait par la biodiversité. Et que si on continue à perdre 81%, 63%, on ne pourra pas avancer sur ces questions en fait, qui nous sont très très chères, qui sont liées à l'économique et à notre vie, à nous tous. Alors, l'Europe, en fait, a fait cette stratégie qui est basée autour de 4 piliers. J'ai beaucoup réfléchi, je me suis dit, j'ai la possibilité de vous présenter ces 4 piliers, ce plan ambitieux de l'Europe, en reprenant tous les détails, mais je me suis dit que ça ne sert à rien parce que vous êtes capable de le lire, et vous le lirez, je suis certaine. Donc j'ai essayé, en fait, de vous faire juste une analyse de cette stratégie européenne, une analyse en fait qui est plutôt liée avec l'approche du développement durable, avec l'approche objectif de développement durable, et plus particulièrement en fait, pourquoi plus particulièrement autour des 5 P de cette approche. Pourquoi ça comme analyse de ma part? Tout simplement parce que, comme l'a dit Marco tout à l'heure, moi j'ai trouvé, en découvrant ce document, j'ai trouvé réellement une approche holistique. Une approche en fait qui prend en compte des problématiques sur lesquelles on n'avait pas de solution jusqu'à présent. Un exemple concret, nous savons très très bien, pour ceux qui travaillent à l'international concernant les questions du développement durable et des objectifs de développement durable, y compris la responsabilité sociale et sociétale de l'entreprise, qui était le petit qui est grandi vers le développement durable, que la partie oubliée dans tous ces processus, c'est le dialogue avec les parties prenantes. On avance, mais on n'avance pas avec tous nos stakeholders. On avance en prenant des décisions sans forcément consulter. Et je suis certaine, je ne vais pas vous poser la question, mais je suis certaine que si, peu importe le milieu dans lequel vous avancez, si je vous pose la question, connaissez-vous toutes vos parties prenantes? tout le monde va dire oui, je suis ISO 14001, 9000, 5000, etc., etc. On m'a déjà fait la cartographie. Mais si on regarde réellement, je suis sûre que vous ne connaissez pas vos parties prenantes en entier. Vous ne savez pas avec qui vous travaillez, quel est l'impact et le rôle que ceux avec qui vous travaillez peuvent avoir vis-à-vis de vous et vous vis-à-vis de eux. Et dans cette stratégie de l'Europe, on trouve cette relation avec les parties prenantes très mise en avant, ce qui pour moi effectivement quelque chose d'extrêmement important. Et j'espère qu'effectivement nous y arriverons dans cette stratégie, dans l'application de cette stratégie. Alors, pour vous la présenter, vous avez vu, j'ai pris le tableau des 5 P, hein, pour la planète, pour les peuples, pour nous, pour la prospérité, tout ce qu'on se dit depuis tout à l'heure, l'économique, pour la paix. Sans ça, on ne peut pas avancer sur aucun des sujets, et encore moins sur la biodiversité, et surtout en partenariat, ce que je viens de vous décrire en fait dans les parties prenantes. Alors, néanmoins, en fait, il faut que je vous parle, il faut que je vous dise quelques chiffres. Le chiffre clé de cette stratégie européenne sur la biodiversité, c'est d'étendre les zones protégées à 30%. Là, je vois dans vos yeux, waouh, 30%, mais c'est un tiers, c'est énorme. Mais pas tant que ça. Vous savez pourquoi? Parce qu'on travaille déjà sur ce sujet-là. Et je vais vous le ramener sur quelque chose que vous connaissez, les Natura 2000. Tout le monde connaît Natura 2000, les projets européens qui sont sur certaines zones, qui permettent de les sauvegarder, de ne pas couper les arbres, de ne pas planter des choses, etc. etc. Et bien, dans le réseau Natura, on a déjà 18% de protection sur les terres et 8% sur les mers. Donc on en a déjà pas mal sur ces 30% que l'Europe affiche. Et au-delà de ces pourcents en fait, sur lesquels en fait, travaillent déjà les réseaux Natura, nous avons en fait les États membres qui ont rajouté des stratégies locales pour protéger la nature. Et ces stratégies concernant la terre sont à 8% de protection de la terre et 3% sur la mer. Donc globalement, pourquoi je dis que ce plan est bien, mais en tout cas il est atteignable, c'est que globalement, dans l'ambition de l'Europe, il nous reste à atteindre encore 4% de sauvegarde sur les terres et 19% sur les mers. Ce qui est faisable. Et les mers font partie aussi de ce que vous avez évoqué, Marco, tout à l'heure. Alors, je continue en fait sur le plan pour vous citer encore 2-3 choses avant de terminer. Qu'est-ce que dit l'Europe? Elle dit qu'il faut qu'on gère efficacement toutes nos zones qu'on a vues. Elle dit dans ce plan qu'il faut réduire la pollution. Vous avez la chance, moi j'ai découvert votre pays, j'ai découvert ce territoire qui est magnifique. Et j'ai envie de partager avec vous là ce soir votre bonheur. Vous avez la chance de respirer de l'air pur. Moi, j'arrive d'un pays où je n'accroche plus mon linge dehors à sécher parce qu'au bout de 3 heures, il devient noir. Où dans chaque pièce dans ma maison, il y a une machine qui tourne non-stop. Non-stop. Été comme hiver, encore plus l'hiver que l'été. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on ne peut pas respirer de l'air pur. Or, vous le savez aussi que depuis lundi, l'ONU a pris la décision et a intégré que dans les droits humains de l'être humain vient le droit à accéder à un environnement sain et durable. Moi, je ne l'ai pas, vous l'avez. Donc je pense qu'il faut se battre pour le sauvegarder et il faut continuer comme ça et aider les autres. Honnêtement, ma petite fille, elle ne peut pas sortir faire du sport. Marco, vous l'avez dit, c'est bien et ça stimule effectivement de sortir. Elle ne peut pas sortir faire du sport parce qu'elle ne peut pas respirer de l'air pur. On n'en a pas. Voilà. Donc c'est très important de continuer et d'aider des pays en Europe en fait qui n'ont pas accès à ce droit qui est le droit humain en fait de vivre dans une planète saine. Alors l'Europe en fait met aussi le cadre sur, vous l'avez compris, hein, sur tout ceci est lié aux objectifs de développement durable. Et surtout, en fait, le fil rouge, et c'est pour ça que je l'ai mis en rouge, et l'importance de cette stratégie 2030 qui arrive, et la gouvernance. L'Europe prévoit de renforcer nos gouvernements, de les outiller et de leur donner les moyens puisqu'il s'agit aussi de moyens, et on le sait tous, hein, politiques ou même êtres humains, qu'on est à notre place. Donc, quels sont les moyens qui sont prévus dans ce plan? C'est 20 milliards d'euros par an que l'Europe va dégager. Et à côté de ça, en fait, on a appris hier qu'il y a le secteur banquier qui est déjà mobilisé, qui a mobilisé plus de, je ne sais plus comment, je crois que c'était 12 milliards, en fait, d'ores et déjà, pour justement, effectivement, nous aider tous à avancer dans la sauvegarde de la biodiversité. Et je vais m'arrêter à ça, parce que, voilà, donc là, je pense que mon temps est fini et que vous attendez impatiemment de poser vos questions. Donc, je reste à votre disposition et j'espère que nous tous ensemble, nous arriverons à vivre sur une planète saine et que nos générations futures seront heureux de ce qu'on a fait, les décisions qu'on a prises, nous, aujourd'hui.
Sì, sì.
If you have any questions, we still have a couple of minutes to discuss briefly in detail. Or to wrap up this initiative, Florence has an initiative, an idea. If you have questions, not just for Florence, but any other of the guests that took the floor today. You're quite shy. Everyone was thinking about that little game that we did earlier, probably. Okay, if there are no questions. I mean, I would have questions for all the four of you, but the interpreter cannot hear the question in the microphone. I apologize. Okay, now it works. I have a question for Piero Manzoni. And the regeneration of all those lands, agricultural lands called, desert agricultural area, into areas rich in vegetation and flora and fauna. And you said that those areas were used for regeneration. European contributions to common agricultural policy. And how did you manage to help farmers to regenerate the area? What kind of incentive? Is Piero there? Yes, okay.
Have to switch in English again?
Puoi parlare in italiano, abbiamo sempre la traduzione simultanea.
Oh.
We shifted, let's say, from the 500 hectares that were hard to scale because the average farmer in Europe owns 10, 15 hectares. We thought that we could turn this centralized pole in sort of barrier for the ecosystem that is on the border of at least 100 hectares. So 100 hectares of cultivation, 7, 8 farmers put together in a consortium. They can afford to lose the 10% on the perimeter to create barriers that are natural, so that 90% within the field produces as the 100% cultivated land, but with reduced cost, because you don't use fertilizers, and pesticides. Of course, if the European Union gives incentives to farmers to use common agricultural policy also in those perimeteral areas that are ecosystemic barriers, they will do it straight away. But this way, we wouldn't be paying a category of people just to survive. We would pay them to create positive effects on the communities they live in. I don't know if I answered your question. Yes, you did. Thank you.
Par rapport à votre question, dans la stratégie 2030 de l'Europe, il y a toute une partie bien détaillée concernant justement des mesures et des actions concrètes vis-à-vis en fait de la restauration des sols et de l'utilisation des pesticides. Donc je ne suis pas rentrée dans le détail, mais c'est très très bien indiqué. Donc on met un cadre dans lequel il y a un cadre juridique d'ores et déjà qui n'existe pas pour l'instant. Mais maintenant, on va le mettre. D'ici la fin de l'année, on aura la feuille de route avec ce cadre-là. Il y aura effectivement tous les chiffres qui permettent de dire quels pesticides on peut utiliser, quels pesticides on ne peut plus utiliser, et comment effectivement chaque État, chaque pays doit déployer des plans d'action concrets pour nettoyer la terre et permettre effectivement au sol de se restaurer d'ici à 2030. C'est prévu dans le plan, c'est mesurable, et il y a effectivement des choses concrètes qui sont, comme j'ai dit au début en fait, qui sont imaginées par l'Europe et qui vont être déployées dans les États d'ici la fin de l'année, voire début de l'année prochaine. C'est bien pris en compte.
Merci, merci beaucoup.
La mia domanda per tutti e quattro è...
My question for the four of you is a bit of a provocation, if you want. We're not risking to do something like we did with climate, with Europe doing something very ambitious and to reduce intensive agriculture. And then maybe we have developing countries, Asia, Africa, producing the food we need, that huge amount of food that we need, as you said, with technologies that reduce biodiversity in those areas. It's a good question. Yes, there is a risk. There's a risk in general. So it's hard to reply with certainties to your question. We don't have certainties. But Piero is telling us that it is feasible. It's something that started 25 years ago, and he said that he improved production, he manufactures more with less cost, with the best impact. So there's a solution. We're not talking about two systems that are far away from each other. He is the example that nature can be regenerated by destinating some part of those lands, and which is just 10%. So it is an example. It is being done in Kenya. 14,000 hectares is 140 square kilometers. 4,000 people work in that farm. It's the biggest production site for flowers in the world, this estate. And he was there, sorry, I was pointing to the guy. This is the guy who owns the land. His wife is the daughter of Giulio Natta, a Nobel Prize. It's a family that has done a lot for the country, and I think that doing even more with this. What I wanted to say is that in the European Union and elsewhere, is there a way so that these projects that are not nice to just to have, but must have, are rewarded receive subventions, incentives. I mean, I hope that what has been done near Milan becomes the standard, but we don't always, I don't think we always have to wait for the politics to give us, stuff, incentives. I was saying that there was something going on, there would be something going on in October with Xi Jinping. He said the world, he said biodiversity. Our prime minister said that things are in motion, things are changing. Biodiversity is among the priorities. And I was happy to hear that. I never heard that. So there are examples, there are models, there's a whole set of tools. We need to put together the pieces of the puzzle, and each one of us should be doing his or her or their own part. And I conclude, if we move the problem to developing countries as we did with other production sectors, then we're done. Then we are done. It is a model that cannot work anymore, and I really hope that that will not be the case. I hope that they will not allow the Westerners to go there and make trouble again. Italy is one of the most important countries for biodiversity, but the biggest biodiversity is in the equatorial area, in Africa, in what we call today the underdeveloped countries. Remember, 115 trillion euros or dollars, I don't know, I'm not sure, but they have wealth, and we have to sit down, talk to them with a different approach, different method, and make the most out of this wealth, and do our part, and ask our farmers and companies to do their part. Manzoni gave numbers, 10%. It's not much for bees, for flowers, for corridors. If we do our part, our 10%, then, we're going to get results.
Je vais me permettre quand même de rajouter, juste parce que sur la question, je pense qu'en fait, nous sommes tous capables aujourd'hui de nous poser les questions, mais qu'est-ce qu'on fait nous, moi, en tant que personne? Qu'est-ce que fait mon pays? Qu'est-ce que font mes dirigeants? Et où se situe réellement le problème? Alors, je réponds un peu de côté à la question, mais je vais quand même répondre. Moi, j'ai eu l'expérience, en fait, un pays européen, j'ai eu l'expérience de travailler avec des chercheurs qui ont décidé, pour ce pays-là européen, de récupérer les données, parce qu'on dispose de beaucoup de données, mais de récupérer les données qui sont déclarées en Europe et les données, en fait, qui sont déclarées au sein de l'État. Et figurez-vous que pour ce pays européen, les deux chiffres comparés, en 2019, il s'avère que ce pays européen a augmenté l'utilisation des pesticides de 50% pour avoir une baisse de la production de 50%. Mais personne, je dis bien personne, ne s'est posé la question d'abord à trouver l'information et de deux, à analyser et se dire il faut peut-être changer la façon dont on travaille et se repositionner travailler d'une autre manière. Après, je repositionne la question à un niveau un peu plus global. Imaginons qu'on se situe dans un pays où les gens n'ont pas de quoi manger. Ce sera quoi leur priorité? C'est de produire pour pouvoir survivre. C'est ça la priorité. Alors, je vais aller encore plus loin et j'espère qu'effectivement, avec cette stratégie, avec ce plan, avec toute cette mobilisation de nous tous et la compréhension de la complexité de la question, nous arriverons à trouver des solutions. Mais on en a déjà une concernant l'impact CO2. Alors, moi qui travaille comme toi, Marco, sur la question depuis de longues années, on s'est rendu compte qu'une Europe à 27, on n'est que 27, on n'est pas 200, on est 27. On n'est pas capable d'avoir un outil qui nous permet de mesurer de la même manière l'impact CO2. On n'est pas capable. Sortez vers l'Afrique, vers d'autres continents qu'on connaît. Vous voyez en fait un peu où se situe la question globale? Eh bien, je tiens quand même à féliciter que le travail à l'international, aussi bien de l'Europe que des pays qui sont au sein de l'Europe, a permis de créer une plateforme qui est en train d'être testée, qui s'appelle la frontière de CO2, la fuite aux frontières de CO2, qui permet d'une manière cohérente de mesurer cette fois-ci quand un produit est produit, ce stylo est fabriqué ici, qu'il soit fabriqué ici ou qu'il soit fabriqué en Afrique, ce sera la même mesure pour savoir s'il est s'il a un impact CO2 plus important ici à San Marino ou s'il a un impact plus important au Kenya ou dans un autre pays en Afrique. Voilà, donc j'espère que sur la biodiversité, on arrivera aussi à avoir les mêmes mesures pour nous tous et qu'on sache effectivement utiliser le même langage quand on parle de questions aussi importantes comme celle-là.
Credo che proprio la parte della
I think that communication will be key to have people understand, politicians understand how important is the topic we've been discussing here tonight. I have a question. The topic is probably very interesting because no one left the room. Or you glued people to the chair. It's an incredible audience. Thank you.
Possiamo, per la conclusione...
Now, to conclude, I will ask Florence to come on stage, to come here and to wrap up with her activity.
Proprio per ribadire il concetto di quanto anche noi
Just to stress the idea that each one of us has to play their part.
Moi, je suis une ancienne professeure, hein, j'ai enseigné pendant de longues années. Alors, comme tous les enseignants, j'ai des formations. Donc, même si c'est une belle conférence comme celle-ci, je pars du principe que si vous n'êtes pas acteur, vous ne sortirez même pas avec les 10% que je vous ai cités tout à l'heure. Alors, du coup, en fait, j'ai essayé de vous prendre des images qui, c'est exprès qu'elles ne sont pas imprimées en super bonne qualité, d'abord parce que je ne veux pas tuer la biodiversité qui m'entoure et la nature également, mais c'est fait exprès aussi. Donc on va vous donner, en fait, Johanna va vous distribuer une carte, pas à tous, mais par couple, vous vous mettez par deux. L'idée, en fait, vous allez avoir des questions auxquelles il faut répondre. La première question, est-ce que dans les cartes qu'on va vous donner, vous voyez la biodiversité? Si oui, vous répondez à la deuxième. Sinon, vous m'écrivez sur le post-it pourquoi vous ne voyez pas la biodiversité dans les cartes. Ensuite, en fait, dans le couple que vous allez former, j'aimerais bien que vous puissiez réfléchir sur la carte, ce que vous voyez. Quelles sont les causes? Quels sont les effets? Là-bas, vous avez en fait un tableau. Donc, est-ce que la carte, vous la placerez dans les causes de la biodiversité ou dans les effets de la biodiversité? Je ne vous donne pas plus. Et comme information, je ne vous donne pas plus. Et sur les post-it que Johanna va vous donner, j'aimerais bien que vous puissiez, en quelques mots, nous dire quelle est votre vision du futur de la biodiversité en Europe ou sur la planète. Quelques mots. Et après, on fera une belle photo tous ensemble devant ce que vous allez créer. À vous de jouer. Je sais, c'est compliqué, mais c'est fait exprès.
No, io sì, infatti io stavo guardando, ma
ci sono ancora, quindi li salutiamo alla fine dell'attività. Ok? Sì. Ok.
E poi scappiamo. Hai una penna?
Dobbiamo distribuire i costi.
Ah,
Salutiamo.
Invitare le persone a prima da un aperitivo,
Ok.
invitare all'aperitivo e dire di prima da uscire di
Attaccare. Dunque, visto che tutti siamo all'opera in questa iniziativa, vi volevo salutare, prima di andare via, volevo salutare e ringraziare gli ospiti, i relatori.
I just wanted to say goodbye to the guests and the speakers because I have to go. Even the two ones that are following us remotely. Sorry, we're doing a bit of a game here, so we got into the game. I just want to say goodbye to you guys. Thank you very much. And we have some kind of dinner outside offered by ID and Repubblica Futura. So we wrap it up. This is the end of today. Thank you everyone, to the speakers, the guests, everyone who followed us today. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye from Germany.
Bye-bye.